Welcome to the Quiverful Adoptions podcast. We're your hosts. I'm Elizabeth.
And I'm Casey. We are two adoptive mamas who have walked in your shoes, so we get it.
We remember the crazy journey of adoption like it was yesterday, and we are so thankful we get to share some amazing stories with you right here from the living room of our office.
Well, actually, we're sitting in the bathroom, but the living room does sound better.
Anyway, none of that matters. We're glad you're here.
So grab a cup of coffee and join us as we dive right in.
Hey guys!
Hey friends! So glad y'all are joining us today.
Yes, we are so excited to be here. It has literally rained nonstop this month in South Carolina, and today we see sunshine, so we're really excited about that.
Hallelujah. So today we have Brett Furst. He is a licensed marriage and family therapist, currently completing his doctorate degree. He works at Pace Recovery, which is located in California, as a primary therapist. He's done so for the last 3 years, and he currently lives in California with his wife and 3-year-old daughter.
We love Brett, and you guys are too. He is a wealth of knowledge, and we are just so honored that he would be willing to be on our podcast. And I'm sure you're going to hear much more from him as our podcast continues over the next few years, because we could sit and talk to him for hours and pick his brain.
Yeah, we already have him scheduled for June, so yeah. That's awesome.
So y'all enjoy this.
Hey, Brett.
Hey, how are you?
Good. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course.
So let's get started by you just telling our audience who you are and what you do, and how did you get into this specialty?
My name is Brett Furst. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I work at Pace Recovery in Orange County, California, and I specialize in treating clients who are adopted but also struggle with substance use addiction. I never really saw myself working in substance abuse, but I always wanted to be a child therapist. I wanted to work with children. And I did that for a little while, and I kind of found more of my calling with like adolescents and young adults. And that's kind of how I got into this field. And in working with the substance use addicts that I work with, I noticed that we were getting quite a few adopted individuals. And being adopted myself, I kind of saw that there was a need to treat this population. So I've kind of spent the last couple of years honing this in as my specialty and figuring out the best ways to kind of help and treat this population. Because there really isn't much out there on like how this population presents, how to treat them, and how best to, help them, whether with addiction or with anything else, as these adopted individuals kind of grow up and start hitting the kind of adulthood, adolescent issues.
Yeah. So are the people that you're serving in that program at Pace, they're all adopted?
We have about 30 inpatient clients at a time, and I would say at any given moment, anywhere between like 5 and 10 of them are adopted.
Okay, cool.
So probably about a third of our population at any given time is adopted. We have our adoption specialty track that I run, specialty groups, specialty education, specialty treatment that I run related to those things. And we like having them integrated in the rest of the community because we see all the time with adopted individuals that attachment issues are definitely a thing, definitely presenting and one of the biggest presenting issues for these clients as they grow up. And so having them be able to model and practice healthy attachment with their peers in a controlled environment, like an inpatient environment, is really, really beneficial and really helps their overall health down the road.
So what age group is it?
So the youngest we take is 18. We try and shoot for between 18 and then the average is probably 22, 23 maybe. Our oldest, sometimes we get guys that are 38, 39, 40, but we really specialize in the young adult population.
And how many people are you working with at any given time? Like how many people does the program accept at any time?
So we have 5 houses. Each house has 6 beds. So at max, we have 30 clients at inpatient. We also have an outpatient program that we strongly encourage our guys to continue with once they finish their minimum 90 days at inpatient level. And the outpatient level is kind of about having a job, going to school if that's in the cards for them, kind of getting out in the world and living a life and kind of learning how to incorporate this new version of themselves, this sober version of themselves, this less reactive version of themselves in the world, and kind of facing down all those things, which is actually the more difficult part of all of this. At the inpatient level, it is difficult, and it's not an easy thing to get sober by any means. But it is like in a bubble at the inpatient level. When they get to outpatient, that's when like the real test begins of how am I going to be this new person with all of the stuff that the world can throw at me. And so that's kind of where that push comes to shove moment comes. One of our 5 houses is a mental health house, mental health primary. So 4 out of 5 are substance use primary, and the 5th one is mental health primary. That's new for us, but we're seeing a lot of really good progress with it. And so that's kind of focused, like it sounds like, on the mental health aspect of things, which has been really good too.
So do you mean like they may struggle with addiction, but they also have a comorbidity like
ADHD or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, very much so. There's always comorbidity when it comes to substance use. You know, we always say addiction is a symptom, not the cause.
Right.
But for the guys in the mental health house, I have a few adopted guys that have been in the mental health house. They have some substance use issues, but their primary is high anxiety, high depression, and then all the manifestations of that. Sometimes we see guys that are like hypochondriacs and that kind of thing.
Right. Now, Brett, you are an adult adoptee.
Yes.
So how has that helped you relate to the guys that you're working with?
So it's been kind of an interesting story for me with that. My adoptive parents did a fantastic job. I have no memory of not knowing that I'm adopted. So I've always known from the time that I was, had memories. And so in that vein, it never really came up for me because my parents did such a good job with it. It never came up for me in my life as a major issue or like something that I needed to work with or work on. It kind of took this back seat in my life until I started seeing this population showing up in my practice, that I started to like, oh, okay, well, they need help. How is my story going to integrate with theirs? How can I use what I know and what I've been through and what I've seen in what I do with this population? And so it's really helped in like this connecting element with my clients of like, oh yeah, I'm adopted too. Like I get people asking you these weird questions. I get, all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, it also allows me to say, hey, I know that your story is unique to you, just like mine is to me. And I recognize like how lucky I've been in the way that my story has played out. It's almost like we share this commonality, but the commonality is that each one of us that are adopted is unique in their story, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Did you have any adopted siblings, or were your adoptive parents biological children after adopting you or before adopting you? And how has that impacted your story?
So I have adoptive sister. We're actually half siblings. We share the same birth mom, different father. We are 3 years apart. I'm older. And with her as well, we've always had the option to have a relationship with our birth mother. We know where she lives. We, friends on Facebook, that whole thing. And my parents always had that as an option for us when we were little as well, which was really cool. But having an adoptive sister, it's been interesting, like sharing that biological connection and then kind of seeing how each of us, even within the shared biology, kind of have manifested differently, aside from the way that usual siblings manifest differently. But seeing how that's kind of played out in the world has been interesting as well.
That's neat.
Do you feel like children who are adopted are at a higher risk of struggling with addiction?
So unfortunately, yes. There's significant evidence out there that shows that adopted individuals, some research even says they are up to twice as likely to become addicts as the quote unquote like non-adopted or normal population. One of the things that I run into in my work is that there's a lot of research showing that this population exists. We know that they're out there, but we have trouble treating them or identifying what makes them different from a regular addict sort of thing. One of the things that we run into is kind of this, historically used to be like this nature versus nurture question, but a lot of research in a lot of areas is showing that it's not nature versus nurture, it's nature and nurture question. There was this very, very large study, I'm trying to remember where it was, in one of the Norwegian countries. It had like 1,800 adopted individuals they studied, and they tried to figure out, okay, is it the genetics if like your biological parents have substance use history, or is it environmental factors like eventual criminality, divorce in the adopted family, those kind of things, and to see which one of those influence the presence of substance use down the road. And they could not name one over the other. They're both, the biological and environmental factors are too enmeshed to pick anything out.
So for the adoptive parents that are listening, basically, regardless of whether or not the biological family had substance abuse in their past or even used while they were carrying the child, regardless of that, whether or not there was drug use, there is still a heightened risk of struggling with addiction with dual adoptees.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's kind of that downside, but having that knowledge is definitely important because it allows you to kind of tackle it from the get-go. So one of the angles that researchers have tried to take with figuring out why this is such the case for adoptees is looking at like attachment science. So we know that kids that are adopted or individuals that are adopted are more likely to have attachment issues, reactive attachment disorders, all those kind of things. And then the people with attachment issues, adopted or not, have been shown to have increased substance use as well. So kind of getting out in front of those and really making sure that you are active in addressing those and getting help yourself and getting help for the child and all of these things, and really making sure that you put that effort in early on, that's been shown to mitigate a lot of this and really help kind of tackle all of these issues.
Now, in your research, has there been any difference in the likelihood of adoptees struggling with addiction based on what age they were adopted?
Yeah, so we see pretty significantly across the research and like any of like the quote unquote like ill effects that can come from adoption is that the later the adoption, the more likelihood of issues coming up. And so that's the same with substance use too. And in the research that I'm hoping to conduct, I'm going to look and see more of the impact of that on kind of the presentation of the severity of substance use as well. It definitely changes the later the age of adoption. And theoretically, it's because the later the adoption, the more conscious the attachment break is. Let's say it's a newborn adoption. They don't really have a memory of it. They don't really have a conceptualization of having a parent other than the one that they grew up with. But if we talk about adoptions that are at age 7, 8, 9, 10, even 5, they have this conscious memory. They have this conceptualization of a different or alternate parent than the one that adopted them.
How can we as parents to adoptees equip them so that they are not as likely to struggle with addiction? I don't know. Is that even possible?
Yes, it's definitely possible. There are many, many ways to kind of help with this. And from my experience in working with this population, the number one thing is have open and consistent and continuous conversations about this stuff with the child. Oftentimes, as adults, we underestimate like the intellectual capacity or the capacity to understand of our children, and they can usually understand quite a bit more than we give them credit for. So even if it's when you first adopt a child, making sure, depending on the age, they understand that they're adopted or why they're adopted, or getting their feelings on being adopted if they're a little bit older. Don't be afraid of those conversations. A lot of times where I see parents and I see kids get kind of messed up with all of this is where the parents have kind of shown fear or hesitation and not explained the fear or hesitation or any of that kind of stuff around discussing the intricacies of the adoption stuff, touching on some of those more like awkward elements where they see the parents might be, whether it's misinterpreted or not, but like showing some possessiveness or a lack of desire to have that relationship or discuss biological parents and that kind of thing. It can be a difficult subject for adoptive parents to bring up, and it can be a tricky thing to discuss, right? There really isn't like a handbook on how to do this, but having those conversations is super, super important. It needs to be talked about because it is there. Whether you talk about it or not, it's there.
Right. What would you say to adoptive families who they have gone into adoption desiring an open adoption? Like, for example, our agency, we only accept hopeful adoptive families who are willing to have an open adoption. What would you say to those families who have the right heart, however, they end up getting chosen by an expectant mother who desires a closed adoption? And so despite the hopeful adoptive family's desires, they are now facing having to have conversations with their child without the ability to have that open adoption arrangement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's where like the uniqueness of each adoption comes into play, is that, you know, we want to hope for like the ultimate best option and all of these things, but sometimes it doesn't happen, and it's not necessarily a bad thing either. But even if there is no capacity for having an open adoption, still having the discussion around that of, you're adopted, this is how this came to be. We don't know who your birth mother might be, or we don't have the capacity to contact her. But even if it's limited information, the littlest tiny thing, like, this is what we know about her. This is what we know about them. You know, those kind of things. Kind of seeing where, depending on the age of the child, but seeing where their curiosity might want to go, seeing where they want to take the journey of like figuring that out. And where a lot of people get stuck, and this is where I see a lot of clinicians who are not adopted themselves or are not familiar with this population, is they automatically assume, let's say like an 18-year-old is going to always want to meet their birth parent, birth mother, birth father, and that they consider it weird if they don't want to meet them. And in my work, I feel like that's kind of a misfire sometimes. I think giving the child the option, or at least giving them information that you have, or letting them know what the options are and kind of give them all the information that you have, is definitely good. But there shouldn't be a pressure on like, oh no, you really should. It's normal to want to figure out who your biological parents are, because that gets real sticky. And then if the child feels like they don't want to have that relationship or don't want to meet, they're like, is there something wrong with me? Why is everyone pushing me to do this? You know, all that kind of stuff.
Right. Lifetime Healing is working to change the way parents are educated about adoption, digging deeper into the emotional challenges and allowing space for a more well-rounded perspective so they are better prepared to walk their lifelong journey of adoption. Join us for a 14-day online classroom experience that will walk you through what we believe to be the most important topics of navigating this complex adoption experience. Whether you are hoping to adopt or are navigating an open adoption and want to continue with your education, this class is for you. We have instructors from all sides of the triad to bring the best education possible to adoptive parents. Registration for our next class has already started, and class starts March 18th. Limited space available.
So what's one thing that you would tell all hopeful adoptive parents whenever pursuing either infant adoption or foster care adoption?
A lot of what I'm saying sounds scary. I understand that, but like, please don't be afraid of this. It can be managed, and it can be helped, and it can be changed. And just in the same way that any parent with any child has a chance of that child having issues down the road. There's a lot of stigma around the guys that I work with, adopted or not. They're like, oh, you're an addict. Oh, society says, oh, you must be weak. Why can't you just stop? All those kind of things. And the same goes for depression, anxiety, ADHD, any of that kind of stuff. Well, why can't you just be happy? Like, why do you worry so much? But having those conversations, putting that effort in the beginning, can really change the whole game. And if, unfortunately, a child does have an addiction problem or some kind of mental health problem down the road, it doesn't necessarily mean that you did something wrong. It doesn't mean that you messed up. I see parents every day who had the best intentions with their kid. Every parent has the best intention with their kid. And sometimes this kind of stuff just happens, but that doesn't mean that it's the end of the road, that your kid is broken, that there's something wrong with them, and that they're never going to be okay. It is 100% possible for them to fully recover and have a perfectly normal, happy, healthy, successful life. So in the event that they end up with kind of substance use issue, it's not the end of the world. It is treatable.
Have you seen any of the children or adults that you're working with who maybe had ADHD that were undiagnosed, or any type of psychological problems that were undiagnosed that could have been treated at an earlier age, but since they were undiagnosed with it, they weren't put on medication and therefore just maybe had a lot of impulsivity or poor decision making because of the lack of care in that area?
Yes, all the time. When I run groups at my practice and I say, raise your hand if you've ever been diagnosed with ADHD, I get probably every hand, if not 95% of the hands go up in the room. And a lot of times with medications, it's kind of a hit or miss thing, because sometimes, and this is all with best intentions too, like parents don't know what to do and they just listen to whatever the doctor says. Parents will put kids on meds when they're 5, 6, 7 for ADHD. I personally don't believe that unless it's a very, very severe case. I don't believe that should be done with that young of an age. I have ADHD myself. I've shown for myself there's a lot of tips and tricks and things you can do and ways to schedule and harness the power of ADHD, because there are upsides to it in a way that is shown in research and in my own life to be more effective than medication. However, medication does help, but there has to be those cognitive powers around it in order to make that kind of stuff work. Same thing goes with anxiety. Same thing goes with depression. We tend to underestimate a child's capacity to have anxiety, chronic anxiety, especially as they kind of hit like the later elementary, middle school age. Teaching them about those things, talking about those things, educating them about those things, just like we're seeing with everything else, getting that education and showing them that it's okay to have those things and here's what we can do with them has been shown to be hugely effective. We're seeing schools now replace detention with mindfulness time or meditation time. All those kind of things, those self-awareness things, those getting rid of the stigmas around those things is huge. I know with my own daughter, who's currently 3, I have anxiety. My wife has anxiety. My kid is, I'm pretty sure, going to have anxiety. So having that conversation and starting that stuff now, she's 3 years old, but I'm trying to start that now with her. It's okay to have these emotions. This is what it means. This is what you can do with it. Here's a way to kind of help. I hope it's going to be super beneficial for her down the road and make all of this less impactful and less like shrouded in mystery of like, what are these emotions I'm feeling?
Right.
Yeah.
I think that there is so much pressure. I can speak for myself in that my children are 4 and 1. And so hearing these kind of things is, like you mentioned earlier, it's terrifying for an adoptive parent. But knowing that there is a gamut of things that we can be doing on our end, even now with my 4 and 1-year-old, to lessen the chances of the likelihood that they will become an adult adoptee that struggles with addictions.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak a little bit about what the treatment looks like for these adult adoptees specifically that you're working with?
So a lot of my focus is on attachment and what I call authenticity. So the attachment piece is specifically with adoptees, but also with like substance use in general. There's a lot of correlation between, like I've said before, attachment issues and substance use. Is one, I try and model and bring into the therapy room what a healthy level of authenticity and attachment looks like. So kind of being that model and saying, hey, it's okay. It's safe to put yourself out there and to be a little bit vulnerable. Because a lot of where this comes from, that fear around being attached and being connected is one of safety, right? Their brain is telling them that attachments are dangerous. They can go away. They can really hurt. So it's better just to not have them at all than to try and get hurt. The old saying of better to have loved and lost than never love at all, they believe the opposite. They believe it's better to not love at all than to do it and get hurt. Easing that fear, showing them that it's okay to put yourself out there and even get a little bit hurt, because that's just kind of the human experience. That's a big part of it. The authenticity piece is having them or helping them get rid of all of those defense mechanisms, the barriers, the walls they put in front of themselves between them and other people, as a way to also keep themselves safe. Kind of in the same way where if the persona they're putting out there is fake and that persona gets rejected by somebody, they don't feel like it's a real rejection because their real self wasn't rejected. It was some creation that they've put in front of themselves. It doesn't hurt as bad, but at the same time, they're not being real. They're not being authentic. It causes anxiety and depression and detachment and all those kind of things. So kind of helping them be more comfortable with that, connect with others. One of the big things we do is have an adoption group that I run every week where it's just guys that are adopted in my program talking about adoption stories, just processing general stuff. Sometimes we don't even talk about anything related to adoption or attachment. They just kind of shoot the breeze with each other and process whatever's going on, but they have that built-in connection and understanding with each other to kind of lean on when they need to.
Do you think that one way that parents who have adopted children can help their children would be to have play dates with other children who are also adopted so they can start that conversation earlier with other adoptees?
Yeah, I think having a support group for both the child and I think for the parent is super important too. Having that peer group, people to talk about, people that can understand that kind of thing. When I was a child, I don't remember much of it, but I know that I was in an adoption play group, as was my sister when we were little. And that was for us, but also for my mom and my dad in order to be able to talk to people and have that support group there. Oftentimes with this stuff, let's say a client comes into my practice and, he's 20 years old, and a lot of people make the mistake of just focusing on the 20-year-old. This is a wraparound. It is a systemic wide thing. The parents having that support from childhood all the way up to if any issues occur throughout the life, having that education, having that support group, having that knowledge there is super, super helpful and very important into making all of this work.
Yeah, I think that's very good for us to hear as adoptive parents, just how important that is to start early.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said earlier, all of us have good intentions going into this, but just growing our awareness and also listening, like putting our ears towards other adult adoptees has been very beneficial. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
Brett, what would you say if there is an adult adoptee that is listening in to this podcast, or maybe parents of an adult adoptee that want to know more about your program, and how can they get more information about your program?
So the program is PACE Recovery Center. You can go to pacerecoverycenter.com. On that page, there is a drop down and there's an adoption specific subpage on there that I authored. My contact information is on there, as well as our 800 number and other ways to kind of contact us and get more information. If you're ever curious, pacerecoverycenter.com. You can find me and my contact information. So please reach out. Even if you don't send your child to PACE, we have connections to other places in other states and other things to kind of help facilitate those. And I'm always more than happy to help a family that's looking to help their child. Please reach out. Reaching out in general, even if it's not to us, is always beneficial. Get that support, get the resources around you. But, in the adoption specific stuff, PACE is one of the few that I know of that has an adoption specific track. So please reach out for any questions, any information, anything you might want to know from myself or from PACE as a program.
Perfect. We'll put that in the show notes as well, Brett.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for being a part of our podcast today. We really enjoyed this conversation. Is there any last thoughts that you would like to share with the community?
I can't really think of anything. Yeah, I think that was good. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Have you heard about the Promise Summit? If you are out there and you're listening right now and you are hoping to adopt, or you're an adoptive parent, or you're struggling with infertility, or maybe you feel called to adoption and you just have no clue where to start, then you need to be at the Promise Summit. Casey, tell us a little bit about what the Promise Summit is.
The Promise Summit is a Christian conference for couples considering adoption, in the wait of adoption, and or families who have adopted. This event is packed with powerful speakers, incredible worship, and a panel that represents all members of the adoption triad, and is sure to be a weekend that you will never forget. Our hope is that you leave the Promise Summit forever changed and armed with the promises from God that will encourage you throughout your entire adoption journey.
The Promise Summit will be held May 3rd and 4th in Greenville, South Carolina, and we would love to meet you there. You can find out more information at thepromisesummit.com or on Instagram at The Promise Summit.